I lost my husband to her, but I kept his final promise. When my husband died, I didn't cry right away. I just stood there, holding the paper the doctor handed me, and all I could think about was his last promise. He made it 3 days before he passed. His voice was weak, barely there, but his eyes were steady. He said, "Anna, no matter what happens, promise me you'll keep the family together. Don't let the hurt take over." At that moment, I didn't understand how hard that promise would be to keep. You see, my husband, Mark, wasn't just my love. He was my home. We met young, back when I was waitressing at Ruby's Diner off Route 16. The kind of place where everyone knew your name and coffee came with gossip. He was 23 then, working construction just down the road. He'd come in every morning before his shift, boots covered in dust, always sitting at the same stool by the window. He used to say, "You look tired, sweetheart. Let me make you smile." And he always did. We fell in love slow, the way you do when you're not in a rush. Small town kind of love. Friday night football games, drives down country roads, homemade apple pie on the porch. When we got married, it wasn't fancy, just a backyard, fairy lights, and my best friend singing off key. But I didn't need fancy. I just needed him. Years went by, and our world got bigger. 2 kids, Emily and Jack. He built us a little white house at the edge of town, surrounded by tall oaks and wildflowers. Every morning, I'd watch him leave for work with his lunchbox in hand, and that same old wink that said, "We're gonna be all right." But life has a way of changing when you least expect it. It started with a cough. Just a small one at first. Then came the fatigue, the doctor visits, the tests, and finally, that word, cancer. Mark tried to stay strong, but I could see the fear in his eyes. So could the kids. And that's when she entered our lives. Claire, the nurse from Lexington. She was young, full of light, and always smiling, even when things got heavy. I remember the first day she came to the house. She walked in with that crisp uniform and soft voice. "Hi, Mrs. Parker. I'll be helping out with Mark's care from now on." I told myself not to worry. She was just doing her job. But sometimes, when I'd walk into the room, I'd see them laughing. That quiet kind of laughter that used to be ours. And I'd smile too, because that's what a wife does when her world starts slipping away. She smiles, even when her heart is breaking. Life in our little Kentucky town moved slow. Folks said time there had its own rhythm, like the hum of the old windmill behind our church or the creak of porch swings on summer nights. People waved when they passed by, shared casseroles when someone was sick, and left their doors unlocked because trust was something we were raised on. Our house sat on the far end of Willow Creek Road, a white wooden place with peeling paint and a red swing hanging from the porch beam. Every morning, I'd brew a pot of coffee and stand by the kitchen window, watching the fog roll over the hills. Mark would be sitting at the table, reading the paper, and the kids, always running late, would rush through the kitchen grabbing toast and backpacks. It was simple. It was real. It was home. Mark was the kind of man who never complained. Even when his back hurt from long days at the construction site, he'd still come home, wash up, and help Jack with his homework. "You can't let pain stop you, son," he'd say. "Pain just means you're alive." I didn't realize how much meaning those words would take on later. When he started coughing, I thought it was just the dust from work. He'd been helping build a new community center, and those old bricks kicked up clouds that hung in the air like fog. But as weeks passed, the cough didn't stop. His energy faded, his shoulders slumped, and the sparkle in his eyes dimmed little by little. The day the doctor called, I was folding laundry. I remember the hum of the washing machine, the smell of detergent, the sound of my daughter Emily's laughter from the living room. Everything felt so ordinary until I picked up the phone. "Mrs. Parker, we need Mark to come in for some additional tests." That's all it took. 16 words. And the floor beneath me shifted. I didn't tell the kids right away. Emily was 12, Jack just 9. They were too young to understand what it meant when your father started missing work, or when he'd winds climbing the stairs. I told them Daddy was tired, that he just needed a little rest. But small towns have big mouths. Before long, everyone knew. People started dropping by. Casseroles, pies, sympathy baked into every crust. They meant well, but I hated those visits. Every time someone said, "We're praying for you," it felt like they were saying goodbye. Then came Claire. She was assigned through the home care program at the hospital. Young, probably late 20s, with soft brown hair and a calm, steady presence. The kind of woman who could walk into a storm and make it feel like Sunday morning again. The first day she came over, Mark's eyes lit up. I don't blame him for that. He'd been stuck in bed for weeks, tired of seeing the same four walls, tired of seeing me tired. Claire brought a breath of something new. She'd tell funny stories about her commute or the stray dog that followed her to work. I liked her at first. I truly did. She was patient with Mark, gentle with the kids, respectful with me. She even started bringing muffins from the bakery downtown. Blueberry, Mark's favorite. Days turned into weeks, and she became a regular part of our home. Sometimes she'd stay late after her shift, just talking with Mark. I'd hear them through the half-closed door, laughing softly. One night, when I peeked in, I saw her sitting beside him, holding his hand. Her head was bowed, and they were praying together. It should have warmed my heart, seeing someone care for my husband like that. But instead, a strange ache settled in my chest. Later, when I was washing dishes, Mark said, "Claire's been a real blessing, hasn't she?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, she has." He didn't notice the way I gripped the plate a little too tight, or how my voice caught in my throat. It wasn't jealousy. Not yet. It was more like fear. Fear that someone else could reach the part of him I was slowly losing. Still, I kept telling myself this was what love looked like, standing by quietly, letting the people you love find comfort wherever they can. But late at night, when the house was quiet and the only sound was the ticking clock on the mantel, I'd lie awake and wonder if kindness could sometimes cross lines we didn't mean to draw. Mark's condition worsened that fall. The trees had just started turning, golden leaves falling across the porch. Emily had joined the school choir, and Jack was playing Little League. I tried to keep life normal for them, even when I felt anything but normal inside. Every morning, I dress Mark, make his tea, and help him to the porch where he liked to sit wrapped in a blanket, watching the sunrise. Claire would arrive a little after 9, always cheerful, always smelling faintly of lavender and coffee. She'd greet him with, "Morning, Mr. Parker," and he'd answer with a smile that I hadn't seen in weeks. I should have been grateful. She made him happy when I couldn't. But love can make you selfish, even when you don't want it to. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I overheard them talking. Mark's voice was low, tired but warm. "You remind me of my wife when she was younger," he said. Claire laughed softly. "That's sweet, but I'm sure she's still that same woman." He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "She's strong, stronger than she knows. But I don't think she sees me the same anymore. I've become something to take care of instead of someone to love." That broke me. I leaned against the hallway wall, covering my mouth to keep from making a sound. I wanted to run in and tell him he was wrong, that I loved him just as fiercely as the day I said "I do," but I didn't. I just stood there, frozen, as Claire whispered something back that I couldn't quite hear. That night, after she left, I asked him, "Do you still feel like I love you?" He looked surprised. "What kind of question is that?" I don't know," I said. "You've been distant lately." He sighed. "Anna, I'm sick. I'm tired. Please don't make me explain more than that." So I didn't. I just nodded and helped him to bed, pretending not to see the tears in my own reflection in the mirror. Weeks went by. Winter crept in, and with it came silence, the kind that hangs heavy in every room. Mark's voice grew softer, his appetite smaller. The kids stopped asking questions they knew I couldn't answer. And Claire, she became part of the rhythm of our lives. Sometimes she'd read to him. Sometimes they'd just sit together in silence. I'd walk by the door and see her hand resting gently on his, and I'd tell myself, "It's okay. It's just comfort." But deep down, I knew something was shifting. Something inside my marriage was quietly slipping away, and I couldn't stop it. By the time Christmas came around, I could feel the distance between us like a wall that no one wanted to name. Mark had always been a man of touch, a hand on my back when he passed by, a kiss on the cheek before bed. But now, his touch was replaced with winces and shivers. His illness had taken away his strength, and with it, the easy affection that once lived between us. I tried to hold on. I decorated the house the same way we always did. String lights across the porch, the old wooden star on top of the tree. Emily and Jack helped me bake gingerbread cookies, their laughter echoing through the kitchen like nothing had changed. But every time I looked over at the armchair by the window, where Mark used to sit humming carols off key, it hit me how quiet the house had become. Claire still came every day. She brought cheer into our dim rooms, humming while she worked, asking the kids about school. She even brought a small gift for each of them that Christmas Eve, a bracelet for Emily, and a baseball cap for Jack with his team's logo stitched on the front. "Miss Claire's the best," Jack said, hugging her before she left. I smiled, but something inside me twisted. That night, after the kids went to bed, I sat beside Mark. The lights from the Christmas tree flickered against his face, soft and golden. He looked thinner than ever, his wedding ring sliding loose on his finger. "You okay?" I whispered. He nodded, eyes on the tree. "I just wish I had more time. There's so much I wanted to do with them. And with you." "Don't talk like that," I said gently. "You'll get better." He turned to me and smiled the kind of smile that said he didn't believe that anymore. "Anna," he said quietly, "if something happens to me, promise you'll keep them safe. Promise you won't let this pain turn you bitter." I swallowed hard. Don't make me promise things like that. But he just reached out and touched my hand. "Please." I nodded. Okay, that was the first promise. The one I didn't realize would soon define everything. The months that followed blurred together. Mark grew weaker, and Claire became more constant, almost like a shadow that belonged to our home. She'd arrive in the mornings, help him bathe, change his bandages, feed him soup, and sometimes stay late when his fever got bad. Neighbors began to notice. Small towns notice everything. One afternoon at the grocery store, my friend Linda pulled me aside near the canned goods aisle. "Anna," she said softly, "I don't want to stir anything up, but folks have been talking. They say that nurse spends an awful lot of time at your place." I forced a laugh. "She's just doing her job, Linda. You know how people love to gossip." But when I got home, the words stuck to me like burrs on a wool coat. That night, I watched Claire spoon soup into Mark's mouth. She was gentle, smiling, calling him Mr. Parker, like always. But when she tucked the blanket under his chin, her hand lingered a second too long, and he didn't move it away. I told myself not to think too much. He was sick. He needed comfort. Still, when I walked into our bedroom later, the air felt heavy, like all the things I couldn't say were crowding the walls. I stood by the dresser, looking at our wedding photo, me in that simple lace dress, him in a borrowed suit, both of us laughing under the summer sun. I ran my finger over the frame and whispered, "Where did we go?" A few days later, Emily came to me while I was hanging laundry outside. The wind was cold, snapping at the sheets as they flapped on the line. "Mom," she said, her voice small, "is Dad gonna die?" The question hit harder than the wind. I crouched down beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Honey, we don't know yet. The doctors are trying their best." She looked down at her shoes. "I heard Dad telling Miss Claire he's tired. He said he's ready to rest." My throat tightened. Sometimes people say things when they're hurting. It doesn't mean they're giving up. She nodded, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. That night, I lay in bed thinking about how children can see things adults try to ignore. Mark wasn't giving up on life. He was just drifting away from it. And maybe, in some way, I was drifting too. It was mid-January when everything changed a little more. Mark had a particularly bad week, high fever, restless nights. Claire started coming earlier and leaving later. One evening, as the kids were finishing dinner, she asked if she could stay overnight to monitor him. I hesitated. "You don't have to. You've already done so much." She gave a small smile. "It's no trouble. I'd feel better knowing he's okay through the night." I looked at Mark. He was pale, barely conscious, but when he opened his eyes, he whispered, "Please let her." So I did. I made up the couch for her in the living room, but sometime after midnight, I woke up to the sound of voices. I got up, walked quietly down the hall, and stopped by Mark's door. It was open just a crack. Claire was sitting beside him, holding his hand again, her head bowed close. "I don't want you to go," she whispered. "You don't deserve this." He smiled weakly. "Life's not about what we deserve. It's about what we do with what we have." Tears rolled down her cheeks. I stood there frozen, my heart pounding. For a second, I thought about stepping inside, about reminding her that he was my husband, not hers. But I didn't. Because even through the ache, I could see something I hadn't seen in months. He looked peaceful. And maybe that peace came from her. I went back to bed, pulled the blanket over my head, and cried quietly until morning. The morning after that sleepless night, I made breakfast like nothing had happened. Pancakes, bacon, the smell of coffee filling the kitchen. The kids sat at the table, tired-eyed but trying to smile. Claire was still there, helping Mark take his medicine. When she came into the kitchen, she looked exhausted, her hair pulled into a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes. "Morning," I said quietly. "Morning," she replied, almost whispering. "He had a rough night, but he's resting now." "Thank you," I said, handing her a cup of coffee. She took it, our fingers brushing for a second. I could feel her hesitation, that awkward quiet that comes when both people know something has shifted but no one wants to name it. After she left, I stood by the window, watching her walk down the gravel road toward her car. The winter air fogged the glass, and through it, she looked like a shadow fading into the cold. Part of me wanted to hate her, but another part, the one that still believed in grace, couldn't, because she wasn't cruel. She wasn't stealing. She was just human. And my husband, for all his love and strength, was human too. The days grew colder, and with every sunrise, I felt Mark slipping further away. His laughter became quieter, his stories shorter. Sometimes he'd stare out the window for hours, eyes fixed on the hills like he was already halfway gone. I'd sit beside him, knitting or reading aloud, but he rarely spoke. One afternoon, I asked softly, "What are you thinking about?" He smiled faintly. "Just wondering what heaven looks like." My heart clenched. "You're not going anywhere yet." He turned to me. "We both know I am Anna." I didn't have an answer. So I just reached out, held his hand, and whispered, "Then let's make these days count." But even as I said it, I could feel him pulling away, not out of cruelty, but out of acceptance. He was preparing to leave, and I was pretending not to notice. Then came the day everything inside me finally cracked. It was early February. The snow was starting to melt, leaving slush along the roads. I had gone into town to pick up Mark's prescriptions, and when I came home, I found the front door slightly open. Inside, the house was quiet except for a soft hum, Claire's voice. She was singing to him. When I stepped closer, I froze. She was sitting on the bed, one hand in his, the other brushing his hair from his forehead, and Mark was smiling. A real, full smile, one I hadn't seen in months. Something in me broke. I dropped the bag of medicine onto the floor. Both of them looked up. "Anna," Claire said quickly, standing. I was just what? I asked. My voice was calm, but it trembled underneath. Just trying to comfort him. He was in pain. Mark tried to sit up, but his body was too weak. "Anna, please." I shook my head. "You don't have to explain. I get it." Tears burned behind my eyes, but I wouldn't let them fall. "I know you're scared, Mark. I know she's been kind. But do you have any idea what it feels like to watch someone else give you the comfort I've been begging you to take from me?" He stared at me, guilt, sadness, and love all tangled in his tired face. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "It's not what it looks like." I nodded. "Maybe not, but it feels like it." Claire looked between us, her eyes wet. "Mrs. Parker, I swear I never meant to." "I know," I said softly. You didn't. I picked up the bag of medicine and walked out before they could say anything more. I didn't slam the door. I just stepped outside into the cold air, my hands shaking. The snow crunched under my boots as I walked to the edge of the porch. The world was quiet, not peaceful, just still. I stayed out there until the sun began to set, the sky painted in pink and gray. My fingers were numb, but my thoughts were clear for the first time in months. I wasn't angry. Not really. I was just tired of fighting against the tide of something I couldn't change. That night, Mark called for me. His voice was soft, raspy. "Anna," he said, "come here." I went into the room, the air smelling faintly of medicine and lavender from Claire's lotion. He reached for my hand. "I'm sorry for everything. You didn't deserve this." I sat beside him. "I just wanted to be enough." "You are," he said, tears in his eyes. "You've always been enough." I didn't want you to watch me fade. I thought if I could make it easier by pretending to be stronger with someone else. I pressed a finger to his lips. "Don't. You don't have to explain anymore." He nodded, closing his eyes. "You're a good woman, Anna. Better than I deserve." We stayed like that for a long time, his hand in mine, the ticking of the old clock filling the silence. For the first time, I realized I wasn't losing him to another woman. I was losing him to time, to sickness, to life's cruel rhythm that takes people before we are ready. And that was somehow harder. The next few weeks passed like a quiet storm. Claire kept her visits shorter, sensing the tension that lingered in the air. The kids avoided the room when she was there, though Emily still waved politely. One afternoon, when I walked her out, she stopped by her car and said, "Mrs. Parker, I just want you to know, I never wanted to cause pain. I only wanted to help." I looked at her, really looked. She was trembling, trying to keep her composure. "I know," I said softly, "and I believe you." She nodded. "He loves you, you know." "I know," I whispered back. "That's what makes all this harder." She gave a small, sad smile, then got into her car and drove away. As I watched her taillights disappear down the road, I felt something shift inside me again. Not anger, not jealousy, just acceptance. Sometimes love doesn't look like what we expect. Sometimes it's messy, confusing, and painfully human. But it's still love. It was late autumn when things finally started to come apart. The evenings got darker sooner, and the air carried that crisp smell of dried leaves and wood smoke. Usually, fall was my favorite season, the time of year when the world feels quiet and thoughtful. But that year, it just felt heavy. Ethan's mood had changed too. He'd come home late from work, saying he had to help one of the new volunteers at the firehouse. Her name was Sarah, a young widow who had moved to our town not long ago. I remember hearing her name from others. They said she was kind, hardworking, and always ready to lend a hand. I didn't think much of it at first. I trusted Ethan. We'd been through too much together for me to believe he'd ever stray. But trust has a way of cracking quietly, like a pane of glass in the cold. One night, after the kids had gone to bed, I asked, "You've been spending a lot of time down at the station, huh?" He nodded without looking up from his phone. "Yeah, just busy. Sarah's been helping organize the fundraiser. She's got some good ideas." I smiled, though something inside me tightened. "That's nice. Maybe I can help too?" He paused for a second. "It's mostly paperwork stuff. You'd be bored." That's when I first noticed it, the distance. Not in miles, but in spirit. The way his voice felt a little farther away each day. Weeks passed, and his absences grew longer. Dinners went cold on the table, and I'd end up packing them away, waiting for the sound of his truck in the driveway. When he finally came home, he smelled faintly of smoke and coffee, the scent of the firehouse. But there was something else too, the faint trace of someone else's perfume. One night, I found a note folded in his jacket pocket. It was small, written on a scrap of paper. "Thank you for being there today. I don't know what I'd do without you." No name, no signature. But my heart knew. I didn't confront him right away. Maybe it was denial, or maybe it was love trying to protect itself. I just couldn't believe that the man who once whispered prayers over our sleeping children could be slipping away like this. Instead, I grew quieter. I kept the house running, made sure the kids were fed, their homework done, their clothes folded. I smiled when they laughed and hid my tears in the laundry room. But silence can only hold so much before it breaks. One Saturday evening, I asked him to sit with me after dinner. The kids were in their rooms, giggling about some TV show, their little voices muffled behind the door. I said softly, "Ethan, are you happy?" He looked startled. "What kind of question is that?" I need to know," I whispered. "Because I can feel you drifting." He stared at the floor for a long time before saying, "I don't know, Mary. I'm tired. I feel like I'm failing at everything. The farm, the family, myself. And Sarah. She listens." There it was. Her name. Spoken out loud, hanging between us like frost. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "And I don't?" He closed his eyes. "You do. But it's different. I can't explain it." I remember standing up slowly, wrapping my arms around myself like I was holding my own heart together. "You don't have to explain. I think I understand. We didn't fight that night." There were no raised voices, no broken plates, just a long silence, filled with years of love, disappointment, and the sound of a clock ticking on the mantel. After that, things were never the same. He slept in the guest room for a while, saying he needed space. I told the kids he was just working odd hours. They didn't ask too many questions, but I could see confusion in their eyes. And yet, somehow, life went on. The school bus still came every morning. The laundry still piled up. I still made dinner, one extra plate out of habit, even when he didn't come home. Then came the night everything changed. It was snowing hard, one of those thick Midwestern snows that blankets the whole world in white silence. I was reading by the fire when my phone rang. It was the fire chief. His voice was trembling. "Mary, there's been an accident." The world seemed to tilt. My breath caught in my chest. "Is it Ethan?" He hesitated. There was a call out on Highway 7. A car hit black ice. Ethan and Sarah were on their way back from the fundraiser. The truck. It rolled. I felt my knees give out. The phone slid from my hand, and the room blurred. When I finally reached the hospital, the snow had turned to slush, the world wet and cold and unreal. The nurse met me at the door with eyes full of pity. Ethan was gone. I remember walking into that white hospital room, the hum of machines that had already gone still, the smell of antiseptic mixed with something I couldn't name. His face was peaceful, almost like he'd just fallen asleep. I took his hand in mine. It was cold but familiar. I whispered, "You promised you'd always come home." The nurse quietly said he'd been carrying something in his coat pocket. She handed me a folded piece of paper, damp from the snow. It was a note addressed to me. His handwriting shaky but clear. "Mary, I need to talk to you tonight. I want to come home. I'm sorry for everything. Please forgive me. I still love you." I pressed that note to my chest and cried until I couldn't breathe. Because love, even when broken, never really leaves. Outside, the snow kept falling. The world was silent, except for the sound of my heart breaking in a hospital room that smelled like winter. That night, I drove home alone under the pale streetlights. The house felt emptier than it ever had before. The kids were asleep, their small bodies curled up in innocence, unaware of how everything had changed. I stood by the window, holding his letter, watching the snow cover the old swing set he built. I could almost hear his laughter in the wind. He had been on his way home to make things right, and he never made it. And that's when I knew. I'd lost my husband to her once in life, but now I had lost him forever. Yet somehow, I felt peace too, because in the end, he was coming back to me. The morning after the accident, the house felt unbearably still. The kids were still asleep upstairs, their breathing soft and even, while the world outside lay hushed under a blanket of snow. I stood at the kitchen sink, staring out at the frost-covered fields, and for a long time, I didn't move. Ethan's mug was still on the counter, half full of coffee, cold now, with a little ring around the rim. I ran my finger along it, feeling the shape of his absence in something so ordinary. That's the strange thing about grief. It hides in the smallest details. When the phone started ringing again, I didn't answer. I couldn't. My hands were trembling, and every sound felt too loud. Eventually, I sat at the table, clutching his letter. I must have read it 20 times before the sun even came up. "Please forgive me, I still love you." The words blurred every time I looked at them, like the ink itself was crying. Later that morning, I had to tell the kids. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. I sat them down in the living room, the same place where Ethan used to tickle them till they squealed. The Christmas tree stood in the corner, still lit, its soft glow flickering against their faces. Sweethearts, I began, trying to keep my voice steady. Something happened to Daddy last night. Tommy, my oldest, frowned. Is he hurt? I nodded, my throat tightening. Yes, baby. He got hurt very badly. Ellie, only 6 then, climbed into my lap. He'll be okay though, right? I pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. That mix of baby shampoo and sleep. I wished I could tell her yes. I wished I could lie, but I whispered, no, sweetheart. Daddy's with Jesus now. For a moment, they just stared at me, like they couldn't quite understand the words. And then Ellie started to cry, small sobs that shook her whole body. Tommy didn't move. He just sat there, his face pale, his little jaw tight. We stayed like that for a long time. All 3 of us tangled together on the couch, the Christmas lights flickering, the world outside silent and white. The days after the funeral passed in a blur. People came and went, dropping off casseroles, hugs, and words I barely heard. He was such a good manual. He loved you all so much. He's in a better place. I smiled and nodded because that's what you do when people mean well. But every night, when the house grew quiet, I'd crawl into our bed and press my face into his pillow, pretending he was still there. One night, about a week after the funeral, I found myself walking into the barn. It was cold, my breath showing in the air, but something pulled me there, maybe just to feel close to him. His old workbench was still covered in sawdust. The hammer he'd used to fix the porch steps lay exactly where he'd left it, and there, on the shelf above, was the small wooden box he'd been carving, the one he said he'd finish when he got the time. It was meant to be a keepsake box for Ellie, shaped like a heart, with her initials carved on the lid. It wasn't done, but it was beautiful, rough, uneven, and full of love. I sat down on the cold wooden stool and ran my hand over it. That's when I found another folded paper tucked inside the box, covered in pencil marks. It wasn't a letter. It was a list. At the top, in his handwriting, it said, "Things to do when I get back." I traced the words with my thumb, my breath catching. Underneath, there were small notes. Fix the fence before spring. Take the kids fishing again. Make Mary laugh more. Apologize properly. Finish Ellie's box. That list became my anchor. It was like he was still giving me something to hold on to, even from beyond. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the wind rattle the old window panes. I kept thinking about that last note he'd written me, the one from his jacket, and those few words, "Please forgive me." I whispered into the dark, "I forgive you, Ethan. I really do." And for the first time since he passed, I felt something like peace. Not happiness. Not yet. But a soft, fragile peace that settled deep in my chest. A few days later, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table with Tommy. He'd been quiet since the funeral. Too quiet for an 8-year-old. He was always the sensitive one, the kind who felt things deeper than he could express. He pushed his plate away and said, "Mom, was Daddy mad at you?" The question cut straight through me. No, sweetheart, he wasn't mad. Then why wasn't he here that night? I looked into his eyes, Ethan's eyes, and said, "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, honey, but your daddy loved you so much." He was trying to come home. He was on his way back to us. Tommy didn't say anything after that. He just nodded, like he was trying to be brave. Then he reached over and held my hand. That small gesture, that little hand gripping mine, was the moment I realized I had to keep going. For them. For him. Ethan may have broken my heart, but he left me with 2 pieces of himself that were still full of life. That night, after I tucked the kids in, I lit a candle and placed it by Ethan's picture on the mantel. His smile looked different to me now, softer, almost apologetic. "I'll keep your promises," I whispered. "Every single one." I didn't know how yet, but I meant it. Outside, the snow had started melting, leaving behind patches of brown earth and puddles reflecting the pale moonlight. Winter was ending. Slowly, quietly, life was moving forward again. The first real morning of spring came quietly. The kind of morning where the frost had finally stopped biting, and the light through the kitchen window felt gentler somehow. It had been 3 months since the accident, and though the ache hadn't gone away, it had changed. Grief, I learned, doesn't fade. It just softens its edges. I took down Ethan's list from the shelf that morning. The paper was wrinkled from my hands tracing it so many times, but it still smelled faintly of sawdust and cedar. I read each line out loud, as if he could hear me. Fix the fence before spring. I looked out the window at the old fence by the pasture, half leaning from the last storm. It was something he'd always meant to get to, but never did. So that weekend, I went out there with Tommy. We gathered the tools, a few new boards, and an old toolbox that still had his initials carved into the lid. The hammer felt heavy in my hand, almost too heavy, but I lifted it anyway. Tommy stood beside me, squinting in the sun. Dad used to say the fence keeps the good in and the bad out, he murmured. I smiled faintly. He was right about that. We worked for hours, him holding nails, me swinging the hammer, both of us covered in dust and sweat by the end of it. When we finally finished the last post, I stepped back and looked at it. It wasn't perfect. Some boards were a little crooked, but it was standing strong. Tommy smiled for the first time in weeks. Dad would like it. I ruffled his hair. Yeah, I think he would. And standing there, with the wind brushing through the fields and the sky so wide it hurt to look at, I felt something shift inside me, like maybe the fence wasn't just for the pasture. Maybe it was for my heart too, a way of keeping hope in and sorrow from swallowing me whole. A few days later, I found Ellie in the barn, sitting cross-legged by Ethan's workbench. She was holding the unfinished heart-shaped box, tracing the carved lines with her tiny fingers. "Mommy," she said softly, "why didn't Daddy finish it?" I knelt beside her. "He wanted to, baby. He just ran out of time." She looked up at me, eyes big and searching. "Can you finish it?" Her question stopped me cold. My hands weren't like Ethan's. I wasn't patient the way he was, but I couldn't tell her no. So we worked on it together. Every afternoon after school, we'd sit in the barn with the windows open, the spring air smelling like rain and hay. I sanded the edges while she held the box still. Sometimes we'd talk. Sometimes we'd just sit in silence, listening to the birds outside. It took us nearly 2 weeks, but one afternoon, we finally smoothed the last corner and wiped the dust off. Ellie ran her fingers over the lid and smiled. "Now it's done," she said proudly. I nodded, blinking back tears. "Yeah, sweetie, it's done." We placed a small photo of Ethan inside, one from our last family picnic, when he was laughing with his head thrown back and sunlight in his eyes. Ellie kissed the picture and closed the lid gently. "I'll keep it safe," she whispered. And that's when I realized finishing that box wasn't about the wood or the shape. It was about finishing something he started, something that held love even after he was gone. By summer, the rhythm of life had begun to return, though slower and softer. The kids were out of school, and the house was full of small sounds again. Laughter, footsteps, the screen door creaking open and shut. One evening, I took them to the lake, the same one where Ethan had taught Tommy to fish. The sunset painted the water in gold, and the cicadas hummed in the trees. I sat on the old dock while Tommy cast his line and Ellie tossed pebbles into the water. It was quiet, peaceful, and for the first time, I felt like Ethan was there with us, not in body, but in spirit. Tommy reeled in a tiny fish and grinned. "Look, Mom, I caught one." I laughed, clapping my hands. "That's wonderful, honey." He held it up proudly. "Dad said you gotta let the little ones go, 'cause they still got growing to do." I nodded. He was right. He leaned over the edge, letting the fish slip back into the water. "Do you think he can see us?" he asked softly. My throat tightened, but I managed a smile. "Yeah, sweetheart, I think he's right here." Ellie, still sitting by my side, leaned her head against my arm. "Then he's happy." Her words were simple, but they filled the air like a prayer. That night, after the kids went to bed, I took Ethan's list out again. 3 lines were crossed off now: the fence, the fishing trip, and Ellie's box. All that remained was make Mary laugh more, apologize properly. I stared at those words for a long time. The way you look at something you can't quite reach. How do you complete a promise meant for someone who isn't here anymore? Then I realized, maybe that was the point. Maybe those promises weren't for him to finish. Maybe they were for me. I stood by the kitchen window, the same one where I used to watch him drive off to work, and I whispered to the night, "You already said sorry, Ethan." And I heard you. I did. Then I smiled. Really smiled. For the first time
next
in
morning,
months. I packed a picnic basket and took the kids into town. We stopped by the ice cream shop, the one Ethan loved, and ordered our usual. I got butter pecan. Ellie got strawberry. And Tommy, of course, got chocolate with extra sprinkles. As we sat outside on the wooden benches, the kids laughing and their faces sticky with ice cream, I felt that strange mix of sadness and joy again. And right then, I started laughing too. Not because something was funny, but because life, even in its brokenness, still found a way to be beautiful. Somewhere deep inside, I could almost hear his voice. Make Mary laugh more. And so I did. Late that summer, the air in town grew warm and heavy, carrying the smell of cut grass and cornfields. The sun seemed to stay longer in the sky, and the nights were filled with the sound of crickets and laughter drifting through open windows. Life was moving again, slowly, gently, like the town itself was helping me learn how to breathe. One Sunday afternoon, the kids and I drove out to the old hill behind the church. It was where Ethan and I used to sit on tailgates, watching fireworks on the 4th of July, or where we'd park after Sunday service just to watch the world stretch out below. That hill had always felt like ours. We spread out a blanket, and the kids ran around chasing butterflies. I leaned back against the old oak tree, feeling its rough bark against my shoulders. And I thought about Ethan's last two promises: make Mary laugh more and apologize properly. He'd already done both, in his own way. He'd made me laugh again, not through jokes or words, but through memories that no longer hurt as sharply. And his apology, it was there, in every little thing he'd left behind. The list, the box, the love he'd poured into our life. I didn't need to hear it again. I'd already forgiven him. Tommy came running over, holding something in his hand. Mom, look what I found. It was a small silver locket, half buried in the grass. It wasn't ours, just something lost long ago. But inside was a faded photo of a couple smiling at each other. Ellie leaned close and whispered, "They look happy." I smiled, brushing the dirt off the locket. "They do. Maybe someone loved them very much." I closed it gently and handed it back. "Let's keep it. A little reminder that love doesn't really go away. It just changes." Tommy nodded, tucking it carefully into his pocket like a treasure. As the months went on, small things started to bloom, not just in the garden, but inside us. I planted marigolds by the porch, the same flowers Ethan once said reminded him of his grandma's house. Ellie helped me water them every morning, her little hands careful and sure. Tommy took to fixing things around the yard, determined to do the stuff Dad used to do. And me? I started to write again. Nothing fancy, just small journal entries, letters I'd never sent, notes about the day, thoughts about Ethan, about us. Sometimes, I'd write as if I were talking to him, like I used to when we'd lie in bed, our fingers intertwined. Today, I fixed the back step. I'd write, "You'd have laughed at how long it took me." Or, "Ellie's reading now. You'd be so proud." Those little letters became my therapy, my way of keeping him close without holding on too tight. Then, one evening in early fall, I got a call from the firehouse. The chief wanted to name the new community room after Ethan, in memory of his service and kindness, he said. I didn't expect it to hit me as hard as it did. The dedication was simple. Folks from all over town came, neighbors, friends, even people I hadn't seen in years. They told stories about Ethan, how he'd helped them fix a fence, pull a car from the ditch, or check on their parents after a storm. I stood there, listening, and it struck me how many lives he'd touched, how many pieces of himself he'd left behind in this small town. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone. My voice trembled at first, but then steadied. "Ethan wasn't a perfect man," I said softly, "but he had a good heart. He loved deeply, worked hard, and gave more than he ever took. And though his time here was short, the love he left behind, that's what lasts. That's what keeps us going." I looked over at Tommy and Ellie sitting in the front row, their faces glowing with pride. "He promised he'd always come home," I said. And in a way, he did. The room was silent for a moment before the crowd began to clap. Slow, gentle, heartfelt. I looked up and smiled through my tears. That night, after everyone had gone home and the kids were asleep, I sat on the porch with Ethan's list in my lap. The paper was worn thin, almost translucent from all the times I'd unfolded it. Every line was crossed off now. I traced the last words, apologized properly, and whispered, "You did, sweetheart. You really did." Then I folded the list one last time and tucked it into the heart-shaped box Ellie and I had finished together. It felt right, like closing a circle. I lit a candle and set it beside the box on the windowsill. The flame flickered softly, casting a warm glow across the room. Outside, the stars were bright, and a gentle breeze rustled through the trees. For the first time since losing him, I didn't feel alone. I felt surrounded by his memory, by the kids' laughter upstairs, by the quiet hum of life still going on. And somewhere deep down, I heard his voice again, gentle, teasing, full of love. "You kept my promise, Mary." I smiled, tears slipping down my cheeks, and whispered into the dark, "We both did." That was the turning point. Not the day he left, but the day I realized love isn't just something you lose. It's something you carry. And even in a small American town, under the same sky we once shared, I finally felt whole again. After that day in the hospital, life became quieter in a way that felt heavy and hollow. I came home to a house that still smelled like John, cedarwood soap, old denim, and the faint hint of his aftershave. For the first few days, I couldn't bring myself to wash his coffee mug. It sat there on the counter, right where he'd left it, a half-ring stain at the bottom like it was waiting for him to come back. The kids were trying their best. Emily took on this role of helper, like she was scared if she stopped moving, the sadness would catch her. She cooked breakfast, packed lunches, and kept reminding me to drink water. I could see the tiredness in her little face, the way she wanted to be strong for me. And Jake, sweet Jake, he started sleeping with John's old flannel shirt every night. I'd peek into his room and see him curled up with it like it was his dad holding him. Mornings were the hardest. The farm would wake up like it always did, the hens clucking, the wind through the field, the kettle whistling. But everything felt out of rhythm. John used to hum when he poured his coffee. Now there was only silence. Sometimes I'd catch myself talking to him, out loud, about nothing really, how the weather was holding, or how the fence needed fixing. And I'd stop mid-sentence, realizing no one was there to answer. I tried to keep things going. I had to. The bills still came. The animals still needed care. The kids still needed me to be steady. So I learned how to do the things John used to do. I fixed the leaky faucet in the kitchen. Took me 3 tries, but I did it. I changed the oil in the tractor after watching 3 YouTube videos. And every evening, I'd walk the property line like he used to, listening to the crickets and pretending I could still hear his boots crunching beside mine. But grief has a strange way of showing up. Not always with tears. Sometimes with small memories that hit you out of nowhere. Like the time I found his old baseball cap in the truck. Or the note he'd scribbled on the grocery list. "Don't forget milk. Love ya." I stood there in the aisle at the store, holding that piece of paper, crying so hard the clerk had to ask if I was okay. A few weeks after the funeral, Amanda called me. I hadn't heard from her since the hospital. My heart tightened when I saw her name on the screen. But something in me, maybe the part John would have wanted, made me answer. "Hi, Sarah," she said softly. Her voice sounded tired, older somehow. "Hi," I replied. My throat felt dry. I wanted to check on you on the kids," she said. There was a long pause. I could hear wind through her phone. Maybe she was outside somewhere. We're managing," I said finally. "One day at a time." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "John talked about you a lot, you know. Even when things got messy, he never stopped caring." That made my chest ache, because I knew it was true. John's heart had always been too big, too full of wanting to make everyone happy, even if it tore him in half. "Thank you for saying that," I whispered. "I'm sorry for everything," she said, voice cracking. "For what happened, for how it happened. You didn't deserve that pain." I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, staring at the picture on the wall. John holding Emily on his shoulders, both of them laughing so freely. "Neither did you," I said finally. We were all caught in something we didn't know how to stop. We didn't talk long after that. Just a few words about John's memorial and how she'd bring flowers by some time. But when I hung up, I felt a small piece of peace settle inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but the start of it. That night, I took out the box John had given me months before, the one with the little blue ribbon tied around it. I'd been too afraid to open it since he passed. My hands trembled as I untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside was a folded letter and a tiny silver locket. The letter was written in his uneven handwriting. Sarah, if you're reading this, I guess I didn't make it through like I hoped. I'm sorry for the things I did wrong, for the hurt I caused. You gave me more love than I ever deserved. Please don't let anger take what's left of that love. Inside the locket, there's a piece of the life we built. Our wedding picture on one side, and a tiny photo of the kids on the other. Keep it close, but keep your heart open too. Promise me you'll find joy again, even if it's small, like the smell of rain or the sound of the kids laughing. I love you, always. John. I read it over and over until my tears blurred the ink. Then I held the locket in my palm. It was warm, like it had been waiting for me. I put it around my neck and whispered, I promise. The next morning, I woke up early. The sky was just turning pink. I poured myself a cup of coffee, in his mug this time, and stood by the kitchen window watching the sun rise over the fields. For the first time, it didn't hurt as much. The ache was still there, but softer, quieter. The kids came down later, sleepy-eyed and messy-haired. I made pancakes, and Emily told a silly story about her teacher. Jake laughed so hard he spilled syrup on his shirt. For a moment, the house felt alive again. That weekend, I took them to the lake. It was the same one John used to take us to every summer. The kids ran down the dock, skipping stones, shouting to see whose would bounce the farthest. I sat on the bench, watching them, the locket glinting in the sunlight. A man fishing nearby struck up a conversation. His name was Henry, a widower who'd lost his wife years ago. We talked about the weather, the town fair, nothing deep. But there was a gentle comfort in the simplicity of it. When I mentioned John, he nodded quietly and said, Love like that doesn't end. It just changes its shape. That stayed with me. Over time, I started volunteering at the community center, helping other women who'd gone through loss. Some were younger, some older, all carrying their own stories of grief. We'd sit together, sharing coffee and quiet tears. And little by little, I realized something. Grief wasn't just about missing someone. It was also about learning how to live again, how to keep their love alive in a new way. I began to find beauty in small things. The creak of the porch swing John built, the sound of rain on the tin roof, the way Emily's laughter echoed just like his. Each one felt like a whisper from him, reminding me he was still here, just in a different way. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, I stood outside on the porch. The air was cool and still. Fireflies flickered in the yard. I whispered into the night, I kept your promise, John. I'm finding joy again. The wind rustled through the trees, soft and low, almost like a reply. Months passed. Life didn't return to what it was before, but it grew into something steady and peaceful. I learned that love doesn't disappear when someone dies. It lingers in the stories we tell, the habits we keep, the laughter of our children. Emily started a little garden in the backyard, just like her dad used to do. She planted sunflowers, and every morning she'd run out to check their height. Jake took to drawing pictures of tractors and barns, saying, Daddy would like this one. And me, I started writing again. Letters to John that I never sent, stories about our days, about how we were doing. Sometimes I'd leave them under his pillow, as if somehow he could still read them. It's funny how time doesn't erase pain, but it teaches you how to carry it differently. Some days I still cry. Some days I laugh until it hurts. But every day, I try to live in a way that honors him, not by clinging to the past, but by loving the present he helped me build. One Sunday afternoon, I took the kids for a drive through the countryside. The radio played an old country song John used to love, one of those slow, sad ones about love and second chances. The kids sang along, off-key and happy, and I smiled through my tears, because somehow, in that messy, imperfect moment, I knew John was right there with us. When we got home, I tucked the kids into bed and stood by the window, looking at the stars. I touched the locket around my neck and whispered, "You are my heart, John, but you're also my strength now." And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone. It's been 3 years now since John passed. Sometimes, when I think back, it feels like a lifetime ago, and other times, it feels like yesterday. Grief is funny that way. It doesn't really leave. It just learns how to walk beside you. The farm is smaller now. I sold part of the land last year. Too much for me to manage on my own, but the part I kept still feels like home. Every morning, I sit on the porch with my coffee, listening to the wind move through the trees. The world feels quieter, simpler. And somehow, I've come to like it that way. Emily's 13 now, tall and curious, with her daddy's eyes. She plays guitar, just like he used to, sitting out under the oak tree with that old worn strap over her shoulder. Sometimes she hums the same tunes John used to sing when he worked in the barn. It's like hearing his voice again, only softer, more tender. Jake's 10, full of life and mischief. He still keeps that flannel shirt folded on his bed, says it smells like home. He's growing into himself. But every now and then he'll look up at me with that crooked grin, John's grin, and I swear it takes my breath away. We talk about their daddy often, not in sad ways anymore, but in warm, familiar ones. Like when Emily burns a pancake and Jake says, "Daddy would have eaten it anyway." Or when we pass the lake and they both shout, "Remember when Dad caught that fish and screamed louder than us?" Those moments make me realize something. John's story didn't end when he died. It just changed hands. Now, it lives in them, in their laughter, their habits, their dreams. There was a time I thought losing him meant losing everything, but now I see it differently. Losing him taught me how to see the beauty in small things. It taught me how to love without holding too tight. It taught me that strength doesn't mean never breaking. It means breaking and still choosing to heal. I've started helping out at the local church now. They run a small group for widows and single parents. We sit together once a week, sharing coffee and quiet stories. I listen more than I talk. But when I do speak, I tell them what John taught me. That love doesn't die with the person. It stays. It becomes the way you live, the way you forgive, the way you keep going. Last Christmas, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Amanda. I hadn't heard from her since that one phone call. Inside was a short note and a photo. A little girl, maybe 2 years old, with dark curls and blue eyes that looked hauntingly familiar. The note said, "Her name's Grace. I thought you should know. John wanted her to know who you were someday. The woman who taught him what real love looked like. I hope you're doing okay." I stared at that photo for a long time. My hands trembled, but my heart didn't feel angry, just still. Grace. I whispered her name and smiled. Maybe someday, when she's older, she'll want to know more about her father, and maybe I'll tell her. Not the broken parts, but the parts worth remembering. The man who loved big, laughed loud, and left behind hearts strong enough to forgive. That night, I took the photo and placed it in John's old frame, right next to one of Emily and Jake. It felt right. Like another small piece of him had found its way home. Sometimes I still talk to John. Usually at night, when the kids are asleep and the stars are out, I'll sit on the porch, look up at the sky, and say, "We're doing okay, honey. You'd be proud." And I like to think he hears me in the rustle of the leaves or the soft hum of the crickets. Life goes on, but it's not empty. It's full of echoes, of love, of memories, of quiet promises kept. If you'd asked me years ago what happiness meant, I might have said something big. A house full of laughter, a perfect family, everything in its place. But now I think happiness is smaller, softer. It's a sunrise over the fields. It's the sound of my children breathing in their sleep. It's knowing I did my best with what I was given, and that I kept my husband's final promise. He asked me to find joy again. And I did. Not all at once, not in grand ways, but slowly, like spring coming back after a long winter. And maybe that's the lesson I'd want anyone to take from my story. That even after heartbreak, even after the kind of loss that takes your breath away, There is still life waiting quietly on the other side. It's not the same life you had before, but it can still be good. As I sit here now, the sun dipping low behind the hills, I can almost see him in the fading light. That easy smile, those tired, kind eyes. I whisper, I kept your promise, John. I really did. The breeze moves through the porch swing, and for a moment, I swear I hear his voice, warm and gentle. I know, Sarah. I know. And just like that, I close my eyes, breathe deep, and let the peace settle in. The end.